Well, it's been 2.5 years since the release of the Era format, and so far, in my personal opinion, it has been quite an enjoyable ride, even if it is a bumpy one, both wallet-wise and also gameplay-wise. But regardless, we have come to the end of Overdress format, and I have to say, the format is in a very good position despite a certain particular deck has been running rampant in the format right now, at least in JP. But regardless, we're gonna tear them off just as usual. And if you guys don't know, this is essentially also an anniversary of 1 year since I start uploading tier list related video for Vanguard. So this is kind of gonna be like a two-parter video in the sense that this video will be covering every right line under my usual rule of course, and my second video will be covering through every single booster. Yes, I'm including the Collab Nation booster in this one as well. So if this is the first time you guys see this video or see my channel, welcome. And my tier list normally follow these three particular rules. The first one is of course no Collab Nation. I'm fully aware that there is a lot of collab deck now that is very meta and very playable in the competitive format right now, but I feel that just judging them from a 1 or 2 deck is just really troublesome. Secondly, we are gonna have a limited entry as usual. So S tier we only have 3 slots, and A plus tier we're gonna only have 10 slots. This is just to separate what the great decks are in the current era as well as a good decks. I am a believer of there are no bad decks in Overdress, but there are decks that definitely gets better support than the others, though there are a few exceptions that I would consider it to be bad. Then last but not least, this is purely based on my experience, so if you guys are wondering, I'm basing it what I'm familiar with the most as well as my personal experience when I go and play in the locals and everything. So if you guys have your own thoughts about certain entry, do leave down in the comments below. Without further ado, let's count the very last tier list for Overdress format. You know, of course, the next format is called Divine Sin. It's still D, but you get the point.
What? You think there won't be a fourth wall breaking in this video? Well, too bad. Now there is a fourth wall breaking in this video. I'm Mars Mechanic, the Mars version of this idiot, and I'm gonna be covering every single relevant collab right line that you guys need to know about. And fortunately enough, there's only 4 I have to talk about. The first one is of course Mygo. It is tier 0 in my opinion. Maybe because of the result, but essentially this is a base deck in format. It can play well into turn 2 with the multiple attacks, and it can scale well into much later part of the game as well, unless your opponent sack. Mygo is not Mygo at all. Then we have Morphonica. I will have to put it in the very top of A tier. This is a deck that is capable of fighting to an extent toe to toe with some of the strongest meta deck, purely due to the fact that it has ability to redirect one Rega attack to any Rega on the field, and you know, it has a very good board building skill. Overall, Morphonica just able to counter a lot of strong deck in the format well. It's just that it also get countered by other half of the most powerful deck in the format as well. Then we have Muneshika, which will always be somewhere in the A plus tier to me. Good rush, good crit pressure, multi-attack, and very insane filtering. Nothing much I have to say. The only drawback I have to say about this deck is the fact that it does need 3 damage to get everything online. And last but not least is Ebisu. Ebisu I will also have to put it in A tier. The deck still play well, even with 2 restrictions specifically targeting this deck, but the problem with the deck now comes in the fact that it doesn't really hit hard enough, while the deck went through very quickly thanks to effects like Monster Box and Gacha. You know, the check top 5 thingy. I don't know what the fuck you call that effect, but yeah, that is pretty much my thoughts on those collab right lines. That is relevant. Now let's move back to what this idiot's gonna say with the rest of the right lines.
Let's start off as usual with the orientation, and for this time there is a lot of new right line, but for DBT13 there's only one, and that is Auden. Auden in my opinion is a very solid deck when it comes to resource. It has a very good ability of drawing 2 almost every single turn. It has ability to bounce back rear guards from the field back to hand, allowing you to reuse some of the on-place effects. But the problem I have to say with this deck, inclusive of the PR, is it that it is very resource heavy, and the amount of reward that you're getting from it is not enough. Like, you barely have enough soul and counter blasters to go through all these effects, and the deck needs a lot more than that, and because of that it has to be in low A tier. I would say out of the gate it is not as base as some of the other decks we have seen in the format, but it is a good start for the deck nonetheless. A little bit unfortunate that it did not get its own mass version. How could this happen to me? Then we move on to Ridicule from the LBTO4, which there are a total of 5 decks. And in my honest opinion, all these 5 decks does have a very solid foundation on launch. Even Fennel, which is wildly said to be one of the weaker ones in the group, I would have to say it is a very solid low A tier deck. The good thing about the deck is the fact that despite the deck force you to use a lot of order in one turn, the deck has enough resource and skills to actually run through all these things quite quickly. While on the other hand, Fennel has easily one of the best effects to give for a 3 attack deck, and that is giving multiple units additional crits, and it has a Gardevoir Ace effect as well. And the order itself is actually pretty solid. The only drawback I have to say with Fennel is the fact that its strongest part of the deck is also its weakest, because of the fact that order is just a very clunky mechanic right now. It's a brick when it's in your hand and you can only play it once per turn. Even if Fennel allows you to play 3 of them within one turn, you also have to notice that yes, the deck does help you to filter through a lot of cards quickly and have a big hand, but a good amount of space in the deck also have to be eaten by this order as well. So some of the strongest support cannot be run in this deck, unfortunately, but regardless, a very solid deck nonetheless. Then we have Xiaomao, and this is gonna be a very first entry in this list to go into A+ tier. Xiaomao has a strongest turn when it comes to turn 3, and that is thanks to the card like Lucius. I already covered a whole video about it before, and I do think the points to retain with Xiaomao, the deck is just that ridiculous when it comes to the number of regular attacks and the power that it can reach. The problem with the deck though, to me, is the fact that it heavily relies on trigger to actually pressure, because it doesn't have anything other than additional drive and essentially big number. And we all know by now that unless you have a really good resource backing with it, it is kind of useless. But its power level is very respectable, and that's why it is in A+ tier, as it does have enough resource to push it. It's just a step short of being a very definition of a meta deck. On to the third new deck for Ridicule, and that is Sienna, and the last one of this year that are not encountered right line. Sienna is very interesting because just like Yosuba, it is a very defensive focused deck, and it is capable of shut down some of the deck's base offense. And if those meta players are not playing carefully, you are dead. But unfortunately for Sienna, those decks are still able to counter her very well due to her limitation of some of the mechanic that she is currently running behind. The threshold of her power increase skill is very limited, and Blitz Order can only be played once per turn, which kind of stinks for her, especially she rely on those a lot. So unless there is a card that allows Sienna to enable her to play more than one Blitz Order per turn, I wouldn't see the deck gets improvement. It is still playable deck nonetheless, so I have to put it into high B tier. Like, it needs a bit more push to make this playstyle actually works. Next up we have Pacifica, and okay, I'll say this first. This is a huge disclaimer here. I don't think I'm a good Pacifica player. But in my honest opinion, with the right build, it's a solid low A tier deck. Here's a problem. I do still think that the point that I make in my video about Pacifica is justified. There is not enough Pacifica to go through the deck, and the amount of power and resource increment that come with all of her skill is just not enough. You need a bit more push with this deck, but it's still a very solid foundation nonetheless, especially if you know what to do with this deck. I don't know, so I just leave it at low A because I think it is playable with the right build. It's just that it's definitely require a lot of commitment to actually find that right build. Then we have last but not least Ridicule deck. This, in my opinion, will also be in an A+ tier. The best way I can describe Prism is that it has a base out of the 3 most common type of the deck we have seen in the current format, and that is turn 2 deck, turn 3 deck, and turn 4 deck. Prism kind of managed to strike everything right in the middle, with turn 3 being her strongest if you are going second. But regardless, Prism in my opinion is a deck that has a very good shield economy, it has a very good draw power, search capability, and overall it has a solid number. The thing that I feel that is being held back is the fact that against the strongest deck in the format right now, it kind of fallen short of it because it kind of tipping its toe into aggression build and tempo build at the same time. And as we all know, most of the tempo builds start to lose its edge in the recent months. So unfortunately, Prism was able to barely make it into the list of top decks, but wasn't able to get any higher than that. Next up, we have two of the strike deck, Luat and Shiranui. This is gonna be an interesting one because in my honest opinion, Shiranui is an easily S tier deck. The deck has so much flexibility thanks to the stealth in its name and the fact that you can actually do a lot of shenanigans with it really makes the deck really flexible. And also, you know, the fact that you get 2 additional free attacks every turn can be a little bit painful for opponent, as the deck has a really strong rush, almost Vivace level of rush. The problem with the deck I'm seeing now though is the fact that there is a counter coming up. But regardless, I do still think Shiranui is a very strong deck because unless you pull that specific regular order piece out, it is gonna be very hard to counter Shiranui unless you're playing decks like Mygo, which is capable of doing a lot of multi-attacks while still maintaining a very healthy hand size during the Shiranui base turn. Then we have Luat. This, in my honest opinion, is an interesting specimen because I still stand by every single point I made in my Luat video. Thanks for helping me to hit that 1k plus on that video. To me, the points still retain. The deck has great recyclability, the deck has great utility, but its extender is on a weaker side. What I feel that I did underestimate is its recyclability. Because its recyclability is so strong and its draw power is actually a lot stronger with the right build, the fact that Mephisto is a little underwhelming kind of makes sense because of the fact that the deck viewed more or less capable of living through until your second strike, which most of the time is capable of finishing off your opponent because of how strong Darkstrider is as a finisher.
お前はもう死んでいる。何?
So with all that elements in mind, I have to put it in the top of A tier. A plus tier, sorry. As I said just now, Luat is definitely mid. Like, it does have a problem. But the fact that its recyclability and resource and utility is able to overcome that huge weakness that I mentioned deserves a praise and, in my honest opinion, deserve to be one of the top deck in the format right now. Then we have a magazine orientation, and in my honest opinion, the 3 new boss units that we did get is not bad, but it doesn't really make a huge splash for the meta overall, so I'm just gonna go through it very quickly. Timestamp Dragon, C tier. Having a Sophie Choice skill and ability to do a time limit nice, but the problem I have here is the fact that the Sophie Choice is not really a choice, as both of the skill is a little bit underwhelming to be considered a Sophie Choice benefit. I'd rather have a combined skill overall instead of splitting effect into 2. Then we have the new Spino, which is a Dino Dragon build. I actually like this card a lot. It has a lot of potential and it does mix relatively well into the current Dino Dragon engine, especially with that grade 1 that is capable of hitting 33k on its own. And because of that, I'm willing to put it into low A tier. It has a potential, but I think it needs a few more Dino Dragon that is specific to the deck that kind of just tidy up all the messy ends. Then last but not least, we have I don't know how to pronounce that name.
Helmver.
Essentially for me, the best among the 3 because its capability to fetch 1 card per turn is actually great, but the fact that it's able to get order and get additional benefit from it is a huge plus. And normal order Keter is low-key very strong, so I have to keep it low A tier as well. It is good, but I do feel that the normal order selection for Keter at the moment is a little bit underwhelming. Maybe something that actually play into his playstyle will actually improve his deck performance by a lot. And last but not least, for the orientation, we have the triple drive booster Right Lines, Z-Lance, and Luhan. And I'll be honest, both are not bad at the moment, but I will have to say one of the deck has a strong potential to be an A plus deck, and that is Luhan. Yes, I actually gonna rank it at A plus, and there is a reason for it. But just to put a TLDR from the video that I have made before, the deck essentially works like a Useberg that can actually search, and a lot of the key pieces that it needs to be searched can be searched by essentially the Vanguard very easily. Meanwhile, the deck also is capable of recycling those key pieces back into deck, meanwhile still populating the field very well. Do you remember when I talked about Hemville earlier about how there is not a lot of strong normal Keter order? Well, this card has one exclusive normal order specifically for this deck, and it actually helps the deck a lot. And because of all these elements, I have to put it in A plus tier. This might be me on a little bit of Luan high, but I do still think this is a very solid deck and can stand toe to toe with Duisburg very easily. And then we have Z-Lance, and I'll put Z-Lance in B tier for now, like low B tier. The reason behind this is kind of just simply boiled down to the fact that this deck has a lot of reminiscence to Eva. I already covered the whole thing about the deck in another video already, but essentially this deck is one grade 1 set order away from actually being considered good to play in a competitive setting, as at the moment right now it is considered a turn 4 deck, and what it is capable of is essentially just not enough. Like plus 10k with no drive is good and all, and don't forget that it does do a triple drive which leads into a good sustain. But the biggest problem I have here is that Z-Lance has to compete with so many very powerful turn 4 deck, which will be covered later, and because of that right now for him the playfield are just unfair, and I feel that just giving this card one grade 1 set order will improve upon his performance by a lot. And of course, another good Wrought Iron Rayguard will be great for this deck as well. Okay, now that we have went through the orientation, let's move on to the deck that did get a significant support from the DBT13 all the way to the last booster of the Overdress Triple Drive booster. Let's start off with Dragon Empire, and we have Jiva.
Finger licking good. Finger licking good. Finger licking good.
And only Jiva. A little bit stashed, but that's what it is. I mean, they literally just decide not to give any other support to other Dragon Empire cards and just simply give this deck a big fat rework, and it actually works, as I do still think it is one of the best deck in the format right now, A+ tier. The reason behind this is because of the fact that Stura is such an easy to build card provided you have a cost for it, and the brand new rework support that she did get actually make it works. The problem with this deck though is the fact that it can be quite fragile, in the sense that the moment your Stra is not on the field, your Nirvana just lose a lot of performances, and from what I'm seeing over the past few months, it is definitely the very first deck to actually fail off the meta since DBT13. But it is still a very powerful deck nonetheless, and that's why I'm willing to put it in A+ tier, at the bottom of it at least. Moving on into Dark States, and oh boy, there is quite a bit, since DBT13 is like a reunion for all mass units, as almost every single mass deck gets support in DBT13. Let's go through some of the smaller ones first. We have Unica and Greedon. In my honest opinion, Greedon positioning in the current meta did get affected a bit with the Rishirano release, but I do still think it is an A+ tier deck. The reason behind that is because of the fact that it is capable of pressuring a lot of opponents into do multiple cards at the same time, and it is a very easy to use restand deck that actually is very flexible. So because of that flexibility, it's able to stay in the A+ tier, though I have to say that Chernui being there definitely kind of dampened the deck's glory quite a bit. And heck, at least the deck is currently seeing a huge success in DBT12 for English meta right now, so props for that. Then we have Bego or Unica, and yeah, even with the support, the deck is forever gonna be in B tier.
Emotional damage.
The problem with Unica, I feel, is that like its requirement is so hard, and the only way to actually fix this support is to give a card that is even more broken than any other support that it has given. So to me, Unica will forever be stuck in the B tier until there is a card that actually unlocks its full potential. Then let's move on to Omina Grugio. Omina Grugio to me did fall off, as we have so many strong decks in the past few months, but I do still think it is an A tier deck. It fall off A+ tier because there are just other decks that are kind of better than Grugio, but I do have to say that Grugio do have a lot of good matchup against some of the strongest deck in the format. It's just that it weak against 2/3 of the format as well. The reason behind that is because of the fact that its shield reduction skill would have been very strong if it came a few booster earlier, as it is leaning more towards tempo territory deck, and because of that, the deck tends not to be able to push for the game that quickly because they don't have a proper endgame yet. So because of that, it has to drop off from the list, and this pains me a lot, as it is easily one of my favorite Dark State decks up to date. Then moving on to last but of course not least, Rajuro. And I'll have to say that ever since the release of Drageo in DBT13, it did fall off quite a bit because there's a lot of deck that is capable of actually countering Drageo as a whole. But I do have to say, personally, it is still one of the best deck, third best deck in the format in my opinion. The reason behind me putting it this high is because of the fact that the movement you go into turn 4 is Drageo territory, and it has been very consistent because it is capable of more or less shut down your opponent if your opponent are not being careful with the way they're guarding. And if they are being careful, the fact that you can actually reduce your opponent power down to 0 on top of able to hit for at least like 35k onwards is actually very painful. What does mean that without PG and effect triggers, you need at least 2 to 3 cards from your hand to actually guard, and that is a huge deal. The only reason why I feel like it has been falling off a lot is because of the fact that Drageo before turn 4 is still not very good. Like, it decided to put their ship all into the turn 4 and some ship into the turn 3, which is far from being enough, especially in the current format where there is so many decks that is capable of countering Drageo. But the moment you go into that specific turn 4, it just go time, and that's why I think personally I have to put it in S tier. And you know, I'm a dusted guy, so let me put at least 1 entry in S tier, man. I normally don't put it, but I do feel that Drageo has that potential. Okay, moving on to Keter Sanctuary, and we only get one deck support as well, and that is Yusberg. And this is gonna be easily one of the quickest fill up of the top deck you ever seen in my tier list video. Yusberg is a S tier deck, and it will go in the second place. So essentially Shiranui, Yusberg, and Drageo. The reason why I'm put Yusberg this high is because of the fact that Yusberg is the king of turn 3 decks. As long as you're capable of getting Furgosa and Corino, it is capable of pushing your opponent to 5 or even go for the kill very easily, on top of cards like Seguana that allow you to essentially get a second Vanguard attack. And I'll put it this way lah, my stance on Yusberg being a shit card is still there. Like, Full Blast is a very bad card if not for Corino and Furgosa. So to me, it is also its biggest weakness, because if you cannot get Corino or Furgosa at any part of the game, the deck literally cannot play, because of the fact that with Full Blast build, you have to really cater your build toward building to Full Blast, and you can't really do anything else. So because of that, the moment you whiff any of the skill, it can get very painful to play as a Yusberg player. But regardless, its power level is easily able to overcome all those problems, and of course Keter capability to filter, and that's why I'm willing to put Yusberg as one of the best deck in current format right now. And surprisingly, it holded itself well against some of the newer decks like Luard and Shiranui. Moving on into the gate, the brand gate, we have 2 decks that did get the support. I'm not gonna count the generic cards, even though it is kind of like office support. The very first one we have is Avantgarde, and I will say this Avantgarde, I'm willing to put it up from B tier previously into mid A tier. The thing about Avantgarde is that it need to sack. It need to draw into Sky Ritter to actually perform at its best, and you also need to draw into the Grade 2 promo that actually help you to fetch strategy cards. So essentially, the deck needs a lot of key pieces, but the moment everything fit into the puzzle for you, it hits really hard. So to me, Avantgarde is one of those decks where the moment you get all the pieces right, it just boom and just finish your opponent very quickly. And it is one of those decks that tests your luck a lot, because if you are not lucky player at all, this deck will just screw you up. Avantgarde is very similar to Gridon in that aspect, but to me, I think what makes Gridon have an edge over Avantgarde is the fact that Gridon still have ability to put the player lose condition to 7 damage instead of 6, which allow you to have more resource and leeway, while this deck more or less follow the normal Vanguard rules. And also, of course, you still need to hit on your first Vanguard attack on turn 3 to actually get a restand. Is still one of the most painful aspect of this deck. I know the restriction needs to be there, but come on man, it doesn't need to be hit that hard. Then we have Belshra, and this is a weird deck for me to talk about because I do feel that the support that it was given was actually helpful for the deck, but it still wasn't able to get back to its glory that was back in DBT09. And I think that might come for the fact that yes, it does have solid numbers, number, it does minus power your Vanguard. Other decks are capable of hitting a really ridiculous number for a much lesser cost that Veltra is actually demanding the deck for. Don't forget that Freiheit actually require you to Soul Blast 2 to activate additional product, and even with the new card Bergina, yes, the draw helps, and the fact that it allows you to activate product additionally without any other restriction is good. Just feels like it came a little bit way too late, and because of that I'm still willing to put it in high A tier, but I think it will forever be stuck there unless, you know, Veltra got some kind of new form that actually flip the deck or something like that. Okay, editing Mac here, when I make this joke I did not see the meme that was the fact that the new Blanket right line in Divines actually has a symbol of Blitz, and now it confirmed Taizo to be back in the Divines. That's just weird, man. I know by the time I release this video, the Blanket right line might have been revealed already, but I'll say this first. I make the joke without the consideration of the review. Last but not least, we have Torquia, and there are technically two decks that we can discuss, and that is Zorga and of course Lianon. And let's start off with Zorga first. Zorga is a very weird deck for me. It has a very weird positioning overall in the format, but I do think that it definitely is one of those decks that has fallen off a bit, but I do still think it is one of the better deck to run in the current format right now, but it barely misses the list. So I'm gonna put it in high A tier, top of high A tier. The deck pressure is still there, everything else is still there. The big problem to me with Zorga is the fact that it needs a very specific card to be in your hand, or at least specific order to be in your hand to actually get all the combo out. And yes, Philander is a fantastic card to have, and I'll be honest, it is ridiculously good. It's a little bit too late to come at this timing. If Philander came one booster earlier, you might see Zorga being played more in the format. And I do feel the King of Mars has been dethroned, as there is one particular deck that has taken that throne as a King of Mars deck. Then we have Lianon, and obviously it's gonna be one of the strongest decks. Being in the same category as Drageo is actually a huge undertaking, but I do feel that Lianon is capable of hold on her own thanks to the fact that she have both Mars engine and also Unison Dress engine, the two engines that somehow was able to intersect very well. Lianon have very similar issue with Drageo in a sense that its best turn is turn 4 onwards, but fortunately for Lianon, she still can do her turn 3 better than Drageo. But the big problem with her is the fact that every single deck in the S tier counters her, but she is capable of beating over any decks that is lower than her. Alright, now that we have essentially go through all the major supports and the newbies from the past 3 boosters, roughly 3 months by now, it is a good time to cover every other right lines, so do buckle up because we're gonna start off with the NFC Nirvana Fried Chicken. So Maha, in my opinion, is in the mid B tier. The deck is more or less still playable after all this time, but the fact that there is a lot of rise in the strong turn 3 deck and a lot of turn 4 deck standard has went up drastically, this deck kind of just got held back by the fact that it barely gets support. The deck still playable, there is still some funky build you can play with the Overdress, but unfortunately it became relic of the past. Then we move on to Eugene, and for the longest time I left Eugene in B tier because of the fact that the deck is actually kind of works after all this time. And you know what, I'm still willing to put him into B tier, and I'm willing to put him above Nirvana. Purely for one reason. As long as you can retire something, Eugene power boost unlocks is actually ridiculous. Thanks to cards like Clifford that essentially make his column very strong now, and he still have cards like Oswald to restand, and essentially Clifford that does return trigger cards back to deck. Narball that essentially help you to populate your board together with Eugene's Soul Blast 5 skill. I have to say Eugene does hold up after all this time. This might be a little bit of bias because I know someone who played Eugene bloody well, but this friend of mine also agree that Eugene used a lot of brain power to think. The meme is kind of dead in my honest opinion. I feel like that meme is now belong to other right line, but overall it's a very mediocre deck. That's the best way to put Eugene. And then we have Overlord. and I do think Overlord did fallen off quite a lot ever since he fall off from the top tier deck, purely due to the fact that nowadays you can't just have just a restand and retire. It's just too simplistic, and the deck still heavily rely on Elder Hatchet, which help to speed up the deck to a turn 3 deck, and also Howlbear to essentially waive the cost of the end from discard 2 to essentially +1. But the problem with these few key cards is the fact that only 2 out of 3 are searchable, but you do need all 3 cards, the last one being the original Overlord, to actually make the end perform at his best. And because of all that, low A tier. Then we have Bab Sagra, and this is a tough one because to me, I'm a Bab stan, and I do still think Bab still hold up despite being a 3 attack deck, but I do have to say her positioning in the format definitely has dropped drastically because of the fact that 3 attack is unfortunately now is no longer enough unless you have a way to pressure them other than just high power count. And you see the deck like Fennel. To me, I think Fennel is kind of like golden standard for the 3 attack deck now because the deck is capable of pressure opponent with more than 1 attack that has additional crit. Bab Sagra only has 1. Even if the power level is high, I have to put her, unfortunately, at the low A tier, like lower than Pacifica. The only thing that I feel like the deck needs is just a way to get Bab Sagra quickly to Persona right, cause Bab Sagra need that Persona to actually push the opponent. Then we have Tamayura, and I can happily say Tamayura is in high A tier, just above Avantgarde, cause Avantgarde is in like mid A. The deck, I think among all the Glitter deck, this deck kind of pays itself the best, in the sense that the deck is capable of essentially rebuild the board that it needed on turn 4 very well, and kind of tempo well off into the later part of the game. The biggest issue I think I would have with this deck is the fact that if you're playing pure Glitter build, the deck kind of needs a lot of resource, but fortunately enough, if you're managing it well, it will be enough for you. But if you poorly manage it, it is gonna be really tough for you. Then we have Shoujo Doji, and a lot of people will be surprised in this. I'm gonna put him in A+ tier, above Luan. Here's the thing about Shoujo Doji. Shoujo Doji, I feel, is a very strong turn 2 deck because of his ability to essentially populate the field very quickly and very early. And let's be real here, he is part of the reason why Shiranui is in S tier right now. And I think over the time, a lot more stealth support has been released, which does encourage you to play to actual Shoujo Doji more so than Megalonosuji, which is the next entry. Overall, I think it cannot be underestimated thanks to how easy it is now to get all the resource needed, especially now that it no longer needed to run the plain PG. On top of it, getting additional shield guard and counter charger. Megalonosuji, though, I do still think the deck is still good, but I feel that its power level compared to the current format right now, it's barely tether there. So because of that, I'm gonna put him into high A tier. It is still good, but I do think the deck needs a Megalonosuji specific support to actually support the thing well. But at least now you can find the snake easier now thanks to the triple ride booster, so good for you guys. And then we have Vermilion. Vermilion is a very interesting deck because to me, Vermilion is one of those decks where if you're fighting against any rearguard reliant deck, he will always have advantage. If you're fighting against a deck that do resist, he will have advantage. But he is also a victim of a brand new Legendary Beast, which does essentially just negates all destruction. And also, the deck do not generate hand resource enough for the deck, even with the new PR. So with all that considered, I have to put him into mid A tier, below Avantgarde. Then Gandiva, okay, this is a spicy one because we know Gandiva has 4 off. It is still one of the more threatening force in the game, but I feel that DBT13 just pushed the power level so high that the Sturguna limitation actually hurts Gandiva a lot. So right now, I think Gandiva is above Avantgarde. I'm willing to put it above Avantgarde. It is still a strong deck, but it is a lot slower. And now there are a lot more decks and cards that help you to resist retire, so his deck definitely take hits in that department. And that is pretty much from Dragon Empire, so let's move on to Dark States. Okay, you can turn back up already. So let's start off with the Cool 8 Bruce.
Oh yeah!
And in my opinion, Violence Bruce is surprisingly get a few good support over the past few boosters in the form of Full Cracia and Noctogeo, essentially all the grade 4 related support, and of course Impending Slicer, which allow him to run into Unrivaled easier. With all these factors in mind, this allow you to essentially play into grade 3 game very well, as this is one of those cards that allow you to play into Full Cracia early if needed to because of the extra draw. So essentially it's allow you to sustain well into the OTK burst attack, and because of that I'm willing to push it into low A tier, below buff subgraph. The reason why I'm not putting it any higher though is because of the fact that its inherent weakness of the fact that it is must turn 4 deck hurts the deck a lot, because 60% of his deck is being limited by Final Rush keyword, which is something that I can't really say the same thing to Vehemence, which is in mid A tier. Like the deck, I do feel like in compare the two together, they are in the similar ranking when it comes to what it's capable of. I do think the Violence Brew sustain better, but when it comes to burst ridiculous power level, I think Vehemence win. This is due to the fact that a lot of the newer support kind of cater more toward Vehemence playstyle rather than Violence playstyle, but in my honest opinion, the reason why their ranking are not that heavily different is purely due to the fact that Vehemence is lacking in draw, but Violence are gaining more draw power thanks to the indirect new support that actually improve upon his deck performance, and that's why I'm willing to put them in the same rank, but Vehemence still kind of edge out because of the fact that it is faster. Moving on to Barrow-Magnus, and this pain my heart. Like, the more I put him down the ranking, the more pain I feel, because if you guys has been around in my channel long enough, you know that my DP design kind of half inspired from this unit. And it is painful for me to say, because not only the fact that Bushiroad has been giving some of the shittier support to this particular right line, the meta also has been shifting against this deck for the whole time. Like ever since Mudrace, I feel like the direction of the meta has been shifting against Barrow-Magnus. Yes, the deck still capable of pushing very well the moment you hit 15, but the problem is that you burn too much hand, and don't forget that Barrow-Magnus do need a few counterblasts to get everything up and ready. So because of that, to me, a deck that need you to take a few damage and have a poor hand size for a burst in turn 3, just not gonna cut it already. And in my honest opinion, I think he's getting worse than Timestamp D tier. Like, this pains me a lot. I'll say this first. It hurts me a lot. But I feel Barrow-Magnus really need a proper good support that can actually lift him up. Not like a bullshit support that he has been getting for the past 2 boosters whenever he get the support. Yeah, that's the right word. The same can't be said with Chaos. Because to me, Chaos, fortunately enough, has a better support lineup compared to Barrow-Magnus. Like, the DBT11 was easily some of the best support that Chaos has ever received. And because of that, I'm willing to put Chaos into high B tier. The chaoticness of his deck, it his downfall this time. The moment you can high roll into his deck, he's literally one of the scariest deck around. But the moment you low roll into him, he's easily one of the worst deck to play.
Understandable. Have a nice day.
And then we have Luquia, and I'm gonna put Luquia in high C. I feel like the deck has fallen off a bit, and this is kind of just boiled down to the fact that yes, the deck can build a strong board, and essentially technical wise, it is easily one of the best in Dark States, but I feel like her problem kind of boils down to 3 things. For 1, she needs Persona Right, and she doesn't have any way to search for Persona right now. For 2, she kind of rely on her PR quite a bit, which is a little bit painful, which kind of leads into the main problem with this deck. It needs a lot of pieces to be in the right place at the right time. Next up, we have Barformides, and to be honest, I haven't been really played the deck a lot or testing it, but I do feel Barformides kind of drop a little bit, or the no right line boss unit, it just being holded back by the fact that many of them do not have a specific support that actually boosts its performance. And for Barformides' case, I have to put it below Nirvana in low B tier. I mean, if you can show me a good Barformides deck list, do show me. I don't mind testing it live on stream. And then we have Transroter, Alter Slaughter. I don't want to make a new tier, but essentially he's yeeted out of existence. Then we have Fafnir. Fafnir to me is mid A tier. To me, I think what makes Fafnir so scary now is of course Holodisc that enable his Persona Right, but I do feel that he is lacking in power, though he do have a very good pressure. But it also come at the very heavy cost of counterblast 2 or more every single turn, which is something that you don't really want from a competitive deck. But the fact fact that he can pressure with his auto additional crit very well, it's just way too scary for it to be considered a bad deck. So I have to put it right in the middle of A tier. And last but not least, we have Chronojet Dragon. A bit of a problem child in that state because he doesn't really play like one, and he did get a few buff over the few moves that we have been experiencing. For one, he gets a PR that does accelerate his gameplay if he going first, and secondly, his restriction list of GG and Brainwash has been released. But is that release enough to push him back into the meta? Unfortunately, no.
Disappointed!
Like, he is definitely still a strong deck. That unrestriction literally just bring him back to his heydays. But I feel that his ability to be a jack of all trades kind of play against him here, as we are at the stage of the game where it's better to be specialized in one specific turn, or you are able to push that number consistently. The problem with Chronojet is that Chronojet power level kind of scale in levels, and because of that, it couldn't kind of compete to the likes of decks like Prism. And because of that, I have to leave it in the high A tier. Still a very respectable deck, but the meta has seen enough change for Chronojet to no longer be good at it. Now let's get some protagonist energy into this list. Because we are moving on to Keter Sanctuary. Starting off, we have Bastion, which in my opinion is still one of the strongest decks in the format. I'm willing to put it in the high A tier on the likes of Lianon and Lua, as the deck still have easily one of the most consistent ridiculous rush that you can get, on top of the fact that it is one of the few decks that is capable of hitting multiple drive within the same turn, with maximum of the deck at the moment is at 5. But I do have to say that the deck do fall off a little bit, simply because of the fact that the deck that got supported in DBT 13 onwards do have a better sustenance compared to Bastion, because of Bastion nature of purely grade 3 decks, which does lead into a brick hand, though the deck can alleviate this issue quite a bit thanks to Grandeur Age and Sky Risen. But those cards are limited, as most of the time you will use Grandeur Age for offense, and normally I don't see a lot of people run that many Sky Risen to begin with. So because of that, the deck does have a very weak defense. The only reason why it is still in A+ tier is because of the fact that the deck draws so much in exchange, which does help the deck to sustain to an extent. But over time, I feel this particular problem of Bastion will rear its ugly head again, and that's why I feel I have to bring it down from the S tier from my previous list and put it into A+ tier, which I got a feeling it might drop further if the Divine Sea meta are very different from what we are used to with the old race format. Then we move on to Hexa-Orb, and I do think it is high A tier. The thing about Hexa-Orb to me, I think, is that the deck has been getting a very strong support even if it's on the slower side, but its main flaw is still there. Like, they fixed the resource issue with the deck, but now the deck facing another issue, and that is essentially the fact that Hexa-Orb has to rely on triggers. And as we all know by now, there is a limit amount of triggers you can run in the deck, even if there is a card that helps you to return it. Though if you take the upcoming rule change and also must play card in the T format, I would say Hexa-Orb is one of those decks that can take advantage of cards like the energy system extremely well. So for now, she will be in high A tier, but in the future she might get some bump in ranking if her synergy with the current energy system we have is actually good. Then we have PB.
It's peanut butter jelly time!
Oh, and in my opinion, PBO is very similar to Overlord in the sense that it kind of aged poorly. Yes, Creduna has been helping the deck a lot, but the problem with PBO, I feel, is that its playstyle is way too old school to an extent that that is the best way to update the deck, and to make a further improvement on the deck, they have to give a new boss or literally just rework the way the deck played, just like what Bushiroad did with Jiva. So because of that, I'm gonna put him beside DN. So essentially low A tier. I don't think the deck has reached its completion and it couldn't be expanded further unless there is a rework. Then moving on to MLB, and this is one of those decks where I feel has aged well over time, purely due to the fact that it is capable of mixing decently well with a lot of more recent Keter support, on top of the fact that there is a way to utilize his support very well in the form of double Emeline column. So essentially you just use Corina to enable all the grade 2 to boost, and then just use Emmeline to swing for a really high number. I would put it right beside Vehemence, like mid A like that. If I remember correctly, I have always been underestimating MLB power level, but I think in the context of DBT13, it managed to age well, like a maybe cheap as wine or something.
I do believe I'm on fire.
Then we have Degria, and do note I'm not considering the upcoming PR in this tier list because it hasn't been released yet officially. So because of that, I'm gonna put Degria into mid A tier also. I'll put her like on top of Avantgarde. Degria is a very interesting specimen for me as the deck has a lot of disgusting things going for it, with ability to gain additional power during Persona Ride on top of the additional draw. The deck also can filter extremely well and can actually populate board very consistently thanks to cards like Maple, Drilling, and also Degria's own engine. But I feel the biggest problem that Degria had is kind of simply boiled down to the fact that her game need to be in a very specific way for her to actually went off properly. Let me show you how needy Degria is. Turn 2, you need to have at least either Magenta or Oath of Revenge in your hand and at least one retrospective to be able to search for all the pieces needed, and you have to play Magenta by turn 2. Turn 3, you have to have at least one AP in your hand to use the Magenta skill and essentially just get the double light combo on top of getting additional Persona Ride. And last but not least, you also need another AP to be able to do your proper endgame, which is essentially use AP skill to ride into dark and get a really huge chunky boost thanks to double Persona Ride on top of Oath of Revenge. She demands a lot, but that combo is very disgusting, though it is kind of lacking in pressure just a little bit because it relies on your drive check to hit the pressure with the critical. But overall, I think the deck is still very good. And then we have Minerva, which to me is still one of the strongest deck, and if not for the restriction I put on the A+ tier that I only allow a 10 entry, it would have been in that entry, and because of that I'm gonna put it in the top of A tier. The reason why it just barely missed the mark is kind of just simply boiled down to the fact that yes, the deck can recoup a lot of resource extremely well. The deck is kind of similar to Baromagnes in a way that you have to take a bit of damage to get all the combo out quickly because you have a limited amount of counter charge. But overall, I do still think Minerva will age well into the earlier part of the Divine's meta very well, but I feel in the later part it will be harder because Minerva has hit the roadblock. I think it has reached the point where the deck has been complete, and to improve the deck further, you need to take the PBO route on either reworking it or giving a new regular boss, which unfortunately at the moment of the day I recorded this video, I don't remember Minerva having a lot of alternate form except for the strike. And then we have the last two Keter right line, both of which are not a terrible deck by any means, but there are some aspects of their deck that kind of hinder the deck from being able to shine competitively, and I feel like we can start with Solaron first because this one has a little bit more burden than the two, in a sense that he was released together with Gandiva, easily one of the most impactful meta deck in the later half of the old race format, and because of how good Gandiva is, it makes Solaron look extremely bad. Like, Solaron playstyle is decent, ability to just check top card and being able to populate a few mid battle phase is great and all, but his fundamental issue that Hexorb doesn't really have is the fact that he relies a lot on RNG. Even with his new support, the deck heavily rely on RNG enough and also kind of eat into a lot of resource, which fortunately enough the deck was able to recover thanks to cards like Strong and Derna being playable in his deck. Solaron has a lot of good elements but being heavily held back by RNG factor, and because of that I have to put him into mid B tier. And then we'll have Azel, the very last deck that is not a collab from Keter Sanctuary, and with the consideration of the new PR that we just got, this makes Azel easily one of the most offensive rush deck I have seen in Keter, on the par with Duisberg, though you have to hit that specific grade 2, the PR, which the deck do help to search it out for it, but for you to have both of them in your hand, the chances are not very high, and because of that reliance on that PR, I'm gonna put him into mid A tier as well. So like here, the deck is capable of recover the board quickly, and thanks to the very powerful support that Azel get on launch, it kind of aged well into the DBT13 13 era, though it also is not able to stand out at all. Then we move on to Bracket, and there is one more entry that I think we have to consider into A+ tier, and that's not Prison.
Emotional damage.
Prison to me right now is low A tier, and the reason behind that is because of the fact that Prison not only just got cucked because of the new regular order, but also we have reached the point of meta where Prison are no longer able to control the deck in the higher tier fast enough that actually makes a difference. And not only that, the deck do have a very shit turn 3, and in my honest opinion, it's heavily in need of a brand new Seraph, which unfortunately she didn't get it, and she's currently the only one from the original 5 who hasn't get an alternate version of grade 3 of herself. Until we see a brand new support for Prison boss unit, the deck will more or less be on the mercy of the decks like Yusberg and Jiwa because of how bursty their turn can get on turn 3, and also the fact that they also cannot really handle some of the strongest turn 4 deck like Ignis as well. Then we have Outfit, one of the last entry into the A+ tier, and I'm willing to put it right at the middle. Office, I would say, in terms of aging, it did get affected by the meta a bit, but because of the fact that its power ceiling is already hitting very high to begin with back in DBT 12, it doesn't get as heavily as affected in the DBT 13 meta. But over time, there are more decks that are capable of utilizing the Office board in the way that makes the Shadow Army token a hindrance more so than a benefit, and that is of course Shiranui. And unfortunately for Office, you can't really rely on the regular order because of the fact that you are already playing a lot of order in your deck already, and putting one more into it just doesn't really help the deck, especially the deck actually heavily rely on the world order to begin with. And because of that, the ranking of Office does drop a bit, but it is still one of the strongest decks. It is one of those decks that is capable of OTK if you decide to rush. Then we have Gravidia.
You guys remember her?
I'm gonna put Gravidia into B tier, like high B tier. The reason behind that is because of the fact that yes, Gravidia is still able to pressure well, but you're still heavily relying on RNG factor to get the effect out. It's very similar to Haste Off in that matter, but Haste Off take advantage of you trigger better than Gravidia. And on top of that, Gravidia is just such a shit upgrade for Gravidia that it's actually affected the overall ranking of Gravidia. It used to be respectable deck if you're playing with PL, but the Mars just holded it down. I think I mentioned this before in my previous tier list as well, but Gravidia Mars is easily one of the worst boss upgrade Bushiroad can ever give to Gravidia. Then we have Eva. Eva didn't really survive DBT 13 meta well because of the fact that her power level is just too low to be able to fight in against some of the highest deck in the format, and I wouldn't call her deck a complete fall off, but I would say she definitely lost all that glory that she used to have for like a past year or so. But I do still think she is one of the very strong deck, and hence mid A tier. She still can kind of sneak in a win against the higher tier deck if she wanted to, but at this stage she really needs that additional trigger, specifically front trigger, so that you can actually pressure your opponent with that additional crit from Obscure skill. What is not aged poorly though, I think, is that they decided to give Hero finally a proper base searcher, and not only that, a base searcher that allow you to play it immediately. This new support actually make it possible for Hero to get 3 base on turn 2. And for those who don't understand, that essentially means that that's a 9 card filter right there. And we haven't even considered some of the other filter you can do with the deck as well. And not only that, the deck also gets cards like the green hero thingy that actually help you to reset your base to be used for defensive purpose, essentially completing the hero formula in the old race format. Like, I do have to say, this in my opinion is one of those dark horses. Like, this is a proper dark horse. Shoujo Orochi has proven himself to be a force to be reckoned with already, but this is a real dark horse for me. And the only thing that holded him back right now is the fact that his power is on a lower side if you do not go into Bolsa Loss, which is the only beater of the deck, which can be easily stopped by a single defensive trigger, despite the deck is capable of going 5 attack on turn 2 and 7 to 8 attack on turn 3 onwards. And because of that, I'm gonna gonna put him into low A tier, close to mid, so I'm putting him here. That's how much those few cards in DBT 13 actually do for him. It is that important and actually improve his performance by a lot. But before we continue, I forgot to talk about Graham Grace. And personally for me, I do think Graham Grace is a solid mid-A tier. Recently, I saw a very great video talking about Graham Grace and how competitive there is. It was made by a guy called Past Turn. In my opinion, I think he essentially has shown every good thing about Graham Grace. But just to put a quick TLDR, Graham Grace has essentially a very good consistency when it comes to the board that it needed to be done, with cards like Dane that help Graham Grace to push the power just enough to force the opponent to guard with more than one card from the hand. Front Bael, which essentially swing for very big number at the first attack, and also give additional drive to Graham Grace. The grade 1 PR, which help you to recycle the Graham Grace. And essentially, Graham Grace has everything, but not outstanding. Jack of all trade, but master of none. Very similar to how Chrono Jet position is at right now. To be honest for me, I think just a little bit more boost in his power on turn 3 is good enough to push him into a higher tier. Also, do go and check Past Turn channel. His video is great, and I feel like he don't really need any signal boost from people with like a lower view count like me, but I'm gonna signal boost him anyway. Go check his content. Okay, back to the bracket. We have Archite, and I already voiced my complaint about Archite in my previous tier list video on how, very similar to Baron Magnus, Archite kind of suffer from a problem where they give a support to the deck, but it wasn't able to make a difference for the deck at all until the PR, which does help you to utilize those cards that are in the bind zone better. But unfortunately for her, her deck improved at a much slower pace compared to some of the newer support, and because of the repeated subpar monster cards, it just proved that Archite has a problem. And I will say this again, why the fuck Monster Searcher has to be non-monster? So I'll have to put her lower, C tier. You might think I'm being too harsh on this, but I feel that we are at the stage where bad support will actually affect your ranking harsher. As the meta are moving at a very fast pace right now, you see how Ignis was a king in DBT 13 and he got dethroned quite quickly even though he's still very relevant in the meta. It just proved that one bad support for any dry deck spells the end for that deck in that particular meta. And the same goes for Eredogramma, which I'm gonna put him into D tier. The reason behind that is because of, yes, there are more strong set order that you can utilize and there are some more interesting support you can actually play with it, but I feel overall Eredogramma just demand a little bit too much and the results are not as good as I wish it could be, and because of that, unfortunately for monster or kaiju, it has to be demoted. It needs a support. Like, this is a way for me to highlight how bad the monster support is, and it needs a proper monster support to actually cushion these two decks up back into like a decent deck. Okay, then we have last two decks from bracket, Messiah and Silhouette. I'll start with Silhouette first because not much can be said about the deck. Essentially for me, Silhouette is also a A tier deck. I'll put it higher than Vermilion. The thing about Silhouette is that it is capable of hitting ridiculously high power. It has a very good draw engine. It has a very strong regards and also recyclability with its set order. The only thing that I feel like the deck is missing is simply critical. It just needs a crit to pressure and the deck will be perfect. And then we have Messiah. In my honest opinion, I think Messiah PR, the order, is doing a lot more work than the Chrono Jet PR, in a sense that, for one, its second skill is more useful here because of the fact that Chrono Jet doesn't use as much counterblast as Messiah, and secondly, its ability to call back any card back from your drop zone is a huge plus, as essentially it allows you to use Climb early, or you also can repopulate your board if you were hit by a control or any retire skill. The only problem I feel with the deck is just simply boil down to the fact that it is so combo heavy that when its combo got interrupted in any part of the game by the control effect, it just crumble. And not only that, Amnesty Messiah is also the most demanding first right out of the four, and because of that neediness, it feels right to put Messiah in A tier. It definitely has lost its shine. There are way too many decks that are able to push him before he can push them back. Okay, this is a lot. Like, I'm still having at least 30 right lines to go through. So normally I don't do this, but do subscribe to this channel and leave a like, as this video takes a lot of effort and I try to put as much effort as I can into all my videos. So hope you guys enjoyed all the contents. And let's move to Stalkeria, shall we? Starting off with Magnolia.
Hello, everyone.
And the problem with Magnolia, I feel, is the fact that it needs a lot of pieces on the board, a lot of pieces to be in the drop zone so that the Frost Scroll can actually call everything out. And the meta kind of being very unkind to Magnolia, because some of the deck in the higher tier actually can get rid of some of the most important pieces from the Magnolia board, especially if you're considering the PR for this deck. The brand new PR for the Magnolia is actually very good, but is also prone to being retired and everything as well. However, there are some saving grace for Magnolia, and that is the brand new Regalia piece, which essentially protect all your Regard from being targeted or being retired by any means, which is actually huge for Magnolia. And I must say, it is a one piece in the deck. You technically can recycle it from your drop zone thanks to cards like Beast Awards, who allow you to at least recycle it and use it for at least once. I mean, regular piece once per game, but you get the point. Moving into the Elder Side of Life, we do get Elagu, which essentially allow you to recur any greater or greater cards from your drop zone back to hand, and that include the very same regular piece I mentioned earlier. And also, Elagu works well as a 15k shield on the field, as it synergizes well with Elder. I mean, it just makes the deck sustain better while still rebuilding the board a little bit better as well. So because of all that, I have to put Magnolia into high A tier. It is still a very strong deck, but we also have reached to the point where just a big chunk of shield number is not gonna help a deck if it is gonna be retired easily by a lot of decks instead. So I do feel a way for the deck to repopulate the field more than just for Scroll Dragon, or maybe something a little bit more cheaper for Magnolia, or a way for them to retain all of their regards on the field will really save this deck. Then we have Flagberg. I'm gonna put him in B tier, like high B. I know it's a huge drop from the previous tier list, but I feel he needs a brand new Flagberg form. Like something like what Aquamarine get is actually just more than enough for the deck, because the deck already have a very strong rush. It's just that I feel like it needs a bit more of a modernized playstyle, very similar to many of the boss unit with the right line that have been using the same grade 3 for the long while. Flagberg kind of fall into that category. Moving on to Roroa. I think mid-A. The thing about Roroa to me, I feel, is that it is like a glass cannon that works properly. Its performance is definitely improved with the release of the new PR, but I'm not considering that right now. So because of that, its rank dropped a little bit lower in my tier list. It's one of the very few decks that can take advantage of the over-trigger disgustingly well. And on top of that, I just like the playstyle a lot. I mean, this is my go-to in Dear Days after all. But overall, I do have to admit that the deck does lost its place because of how fragile their defense actually is. Then we have Maelstrom, and personally for me, I'm waiting for the glory. I'll just what you say. I'm waiting for glory Maelstrom. Show me glory Maelstrom, and I hope he actually get it, because Overlord and Phantom Blaster did get their upgrade form. It feels unfair for Vermilion, Ezel, Maelstrom, and also to an extension Luquia to not get their alternate form as well. A lot in Counter Right Line tends to have a very classic playstyle, which for some of them translate well into a modern meta, but for a lot of them it doesn't. And giving it an alternate form is just a way to modernize the unit to essentially just make certain cores a little bit less painful, or actually improve upon what the deck is built upon. And because of that, Maelstrom will be right behind Flagberg, just purely because Flagberg just seems to age a little bit better this time round. Then we have Claudine, and this is an interesting case because Claudine over the time has been getting a lot of strong token related support, which directly supported her. But I feel the biggest problem with her is the fact that she doesn't have access to Rosarian Fairy, which is easily the most powerful card to have if you're running a token based deck. On top of that, her deck do need multiple different orders to be in the bind zone to get additional power to those restand token units, and I feel like the deck at this stage needs a unit that help her to actually bind more than just one order card from your drop per turn. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of those yet, except for like what, Soga, which is a Vanguard unit. With all that said, said, I'm still willing to put it in like high B tier. Token engine has reached its point where any further it would be too far already. So I think what Claudine needs now is just something that actually play well into her playstyle, and that is pretty much it. Then we have Granfear. I feel like the deck needs a way to properly protect their Rose token, because without the Rose token, the deck literally just die. Same case with Novana with Stra. This deck need a way to protect. So until then, I'm gonna put Granfear also into a high B tier. Its power and rush can be ridiculous, but one retire literally just shut down the deck, and I feel like that's also the reason why a lot of people don't really want to play this deck, because a lot of deck in the higher tier is capable of doing exactly that. And don't forget Shirano exists. Moving on to the last two decks from the Stoic here, we have Misty Arc and Mushi King. I'll just put this out of the way first. Mushi King into A tier, high A tier. I mean, the deck is still a very brain dead deck if you choose the right combo of the Beetles, but essentially is 5 drive with little to no repercussion, on top of the fact that you can filter every turn thanks to the Mushi King crest. And overall, Mushi King is just very fast free deck. It doesn't demand a lot, so you can actually run a lot of strong tech choice into the deck as well, inclusive of Deer Who Wanders the Soul or Mushroom. Then we have Misty Arc, and this is not in consideration of the PR. I'll put her in C tier lah. Like, there's not enough C tier deck, I'm gonna put her there. The thing about Misty Arc to me right now is just that it's capable of loop their resource very well. It has a very unique playstyle that I actually enjoy, but it kind of holded back by the fact that it just hit like a wet noodle, and for a deck that only do 4 attacks, hitting like a wet noodle is not enough. I feel the deck just need another grade 1 Misty Arc with a good effect to actually improve upon the deck performance. Now let's move on to Relico Monasterio, and I just realized that I completely forget to talk about the decks that did get support in LBT04 previously, so I apologize for that. But regardless, we're already here, let's just cover them all. Let's start off with Kairi, and Kairi did get a few interesting toys which actually shift her deck to a new power level. With the grade 3 cycle card allow you to get a free draw, additional power, and also the shield. A new grade 1 that works both as a shield unit and also help you to ride into live Kairi faster, and Penelope, which essentially enable additional attack on turn 3 Kairi, as well as a stronger 5th attack on the grade 4 Kairi. The biggest problem here for the deck is both of its hand size and the power level. Hand size in the sense that you need some of the key pieces to be in your hand to get all the effects out, and the deck doesn't really filter. For the power, it's just that 5k is just not very big unless you have a unit that was called in the back row column, then that makes a lot of difference. And Kairi unfortunately is not able to bounce all the cards back to hand within the single turn, which that limit her defensive capability, on top of making her offense a little bit harder because you have to call over a unit to get additional power, which is sometimes not an ideal move, especially we are in the format where any vase can make in you not having enough card in your hand. And that's why I'm gonna put her into mid A tier for great sustenance, decent rush, but kind of easily shut down by a single trigger. Moving on to Loronero, and I think this is a very interesting case because I do think the deck is solid, but there is definitely a certain element that kind of hold the deck back, and kind of also the reason why the deck is being heavily disregarded by a lot of players as well. But in all fairness, the deck has a great advantage coming from it, as the deck literally has very similar playstyle to Luat.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Let me explain. You see, Luat has Drugstrider, which essentially is kind of like a finisher. Loro has something similar to that level, meanwhile still able to push out 5 attack consistently, but that also comes at a huge cost of it locked behind turn 4. On top of that, Loro also kind of missed 2 elements that Luat had, and I would say is Luat's specialty: sustenance and filter. Loro doesn't really have a strong filter, meanwhile Luat filter easily and almost every turn. And of course, Luat can kind of be a little bit more spendy with their hands, meanwhile Rolo can't really do it because she do not have ability to recycle, in which Luat do have. and because of that, I'm gonna put it in mid A tier. Then we have Clarissa, and I'll say it first, Clarissa did get a boost because of the regular piece, but you know, one piece card is just not gonna affect the board that much unless you draw into it. So because of that, I'm gonna drop Clarissa down to high B. It just kind of boils down to the fact that her playstyle just simply eat way too much resource to get the best play out of it, on top of needing a very specific grade 1 to actually trigger the best hit on the board. And on top of that, in my honest opinion, having a high number doesn't mean anything unless you have a strong pressure behind it. Very similar issue with Leclerc in that aspect of it. And to make things worse, Clarissa just give way too many cards to feed for Shirano Dominate. Very similar case to Magnolia, but Magnolia can sustain better than Clarissa. Then we have Alestiel, and I know that they get a very good and decent counter charger in the LBTO4, but no man, it's bad. Like, I feel Alestiel need a proper rework. Like, not in the right line department, I feel it need a rework in the main deck department. Just give us a dual wing unit already that is not Alestiel herself. That would fix everything. I'm not sure that will conflict with the law or not, but the deck needs those like urgently. And that's why I have to put the deck in D tier. I love gimmick decks, but the support that they give to the gimmick is just not good at all. It's just so bad that it's not funny anymore.
My disappointment is immeasurable.
Then we have Vilista, which I do still think is one of those like decent high tier deck. I'm gonna put her be above Velstra, which is roughly in like a lower end of the high A. The reason behind this is because even though with the restriction list, the deck still perform more or less well. It's just that you were forced to kind of essentially lose early game benefit plus late game power from Blue Shabong or consistent draw engine.
Take the red pill.
I mean, we are at the stage where we don't just sustain anymore. You need to be able to push properly. Vilista is able to push well, but I do feel she need a Persona right for her to be able to push it better. And she also kinda need to activate the gem to get the best benefit as well. So I do feel that additional gem searcher would be great for her, and not like a weird activation cost like Trudy, because let's be real here, Trudy is really bad as a searcher. Then we have Herminia, and I can safely say it's definitely a dark horse from the recall now. I'm gonna put her into, I'll put like here lah, above Vilista. So the thing about Herminia is that her new form is an excellent card, and her other supports are very good as well. Custodia and Livery essentially give you additional shield value and also a way for you to filter out powerful unit from your deck. And the new Herminia herself also allow you to essentially just turn your deck into fire attack while still waiving a lot of counter blast costs done by a powerful unit. This makes the deck also a very powerful, and I would say the best power of the deck is Ellie with Herminia, in the sense that you essentially can do a lot of stagger drive in this deck. So for those who wondering what stagger drive is 1 from L, 2 from Herminia, and then 1 or 2 more depending on how many cards you have. The only thing that holds Herminia back, I would say, is the fact that the deck hand size are on the lower end. This is kind of boiled down due to the fact that a lot of powerful unit tends to have expensive costs, Ellie being a very good example, and you can't really filter well with Custodia because you have to get rid of your soul every turn to fulfill the powerful condition, despite it being a lot cheaper compared to the original Herminia. Then we have 4th tier, and I'm fully aware that 4th tier has been topping in some of the countries as a top 8, which is very surprising. And after considering, I do think the deck deserves a bump. So from a B to a mid A, I'll put like here, above Gandiva. The reason I'm saying this is because not only 4th tier has a better rear guard swing already, but also the deck still retain that capability of being able to rush on turn 2, which does scale surprisingly well into turn 3 and turn 4 as well. So to put it simply, 4th tier base turn are from turn 2 until turn 4, and any further than that, the deck just start to lose the tempo a lot. But because of the fact that we are in the era where turn 2, 3 and 4 are the most crucial, 4th tier essentially was able to fit right in. But I will have to say this also, the deck require quite a bit of sacking because of the fact that the deck do a lot of drive check. You need those drive check to actually pressure the opponent, and I will say that's the only minor weakness that the deck has, as everything else with the deck is pretty solid. I mean, the result had kind of proven itself. Then we have Fealty Rosa, which I think it should be earlier, but whatever. Fealty Rosa for me is, I'll put low A. And it just boils down to the fact that RNG is literally intertwined in almost every aspect of Filthy Rosa. You want to activate Filthy Rosa effect early? Well, you need another Filthy Rosa in your soul to activate the effect. Yes, you can use Release Star Engine, but it is a little bit iffy and you need to have it in your hand. So RNG factor. Then when it comes to her attack, her skill is great, but her offense is also locked behind RNG because of the fact that you have to drive check into a ghost unit to actually call them. If you decided to sack early, that's a miss, and if you decided to drive check most of the defensive card, you don't really want to draw it. Though I will have to admit that there are some ghosts that help to alleviate the issue, but it also leads into another problem of Filthy Rosa, where you also have to draw into those cards first because a lot of ghost units are not searchable. I mean, the deck has a strong drop zone engine, but not a deck search engine, and I feel that if there is something that does help her in that aspect of it, the deck will definitely see an increase in performance. Then we have Lutetia, which did get a Curse Play Search, but personally for me, the support wasn't really helpful. Fortunately enough for her, the PR did fix her problem, but we are not considering that yet. So because of all that factor, I think I would drop Lutetia down to B actually, because of the fact that she needs so much setup. Like when I recorded this video, I just ride Lutetia on stream, and she needs so much setup, and you need a lot of the curse play to be in your hand so early for her to be able to turbo her restand skill. And even with that, her power is on a slow side for a deck that have a chance to whiff the turbo on turn 3. But I'm still willing to put her in the higher tier of the B because of the fact that the moment you hit that condition that you need for restand, the deck does perform much better, especially with Nostria with 25k base attack and not counting triggers and Besana Ride power boost. Like, that's the strongest boot I have seen from a rear guard. So have to give the credit to where it's due. Okay, then we have Liu Fa. Liu Fa did get a new support that does allow her to have a better forward attack. But in all honesty and after the deep consideration, still C tier, low C tier. The new Liu Fa support from LBTO4 is good in getting a much better forward attack for Liu Fa, but I think her playstyle is just inherently bad, and the support that has been trying to support Liu Fa just is not enough to really fix a lot of the problems that the deck has. I would say that one of the ways to fix the deck, at least with my limited knowledge of Liu Fa, I would say a way for the deck to get additional attack would be great, or at least a card that can combo into this support better, or simply just a rework. Like, her skill really need a rework because it just doesn't age well into the current meta. And some of you might be wondering why I'm ranking it slightly higher than Barrow. To put it simply, it's just purely because she sustained just a little bit better, and that is pretty much it. Then we have Meteor, and I personally feel Meteor get a decent boost. Like, deck is a 5 attack deck that is capable of deal at least 4 attack with additional crit, and the setup is needed, yes, but I feel like the payoff is worth enough for her to be in like a low B tier. But the problem is still the fact that she need to rely on that combo, and her power level can be a little bit iffy without a Besana Ride. So with all that factors, low B feels right. Like, in terms of pressure, I think she has the scariest pressure, but the problem with her is also the fact that her power level is just not very high overall, so it's just so easy to guard for the deck even if the deck have 5 attacks. Then we have Kyoka. Okay, Kyoka did get a brand new magazine which allow you to essentially just populate the board before you play into the original magazine skill, which essentially just give you a bunch of benefits. And I think that actually helps the deck a lot because being able to play multiple order within a turn is just a blessing in disguise. I would say the only problem with Kyoka right now, personally for me, is her consistency in searching magazine. She do search, but I feel like if she can get something like with a slightly bigger version of Crispina from a Fennel, the deck will see a lot more play in my opinion. So because of all that factor, I'm gonna put her in mid B, below Chaos. Like, I think that's how good her consistency has improved now. And don't forget that she can do a multi-attack and very solid deck. I just feel the deck just lack a piece or two of consistency boost. And then we have Michu. Michu gets the PR, which does help you to stun a rear guard, and also a rear guard that does help you to do some shenanigans set up on the Michu board on top of getting a huge chunk of power. So I have to say Michu is in low A tier. I feel the deck is solid enough. The only only drawback I would say with the deck is kind of simply not enough hand size. Like the deck doesn't really went through enough resource to sustain the deck, but when it comes to punching the opponent, it's a cannonball. Then we have Hariset, and Hariset new support. It does give you additional attack from what I remember, but I feel her poke in general is just too weak, but she has an insane amount of recover and also sustain. So I'm willing to put her in like high B tier for that high level of sustain. And now that the deck can go into more attacks, I would say it pressure the opponent a little bit better, just a little bit more power boost, like fixed power boost, like something like what Burian did to the 4th tier or the grade 2 that support Biju. Yeah, something like that I think would help the deck a lot. Then we have Petrarca. Petrarca did get a good support in a sense that she got a brand new PR, not exactly new, but you know, quite a while already, but you get the point. But essentially the card allow you to make the choice easier, so to whether go for additional rearguard attack or to get into another rewrite attack, which actually makes the deck a little bit more playable. Though I do have to say that because of its Highlander nature, it is hard to find the right support for the deck, especially considering the fact that Ridicule do not really have a lot of generic to begin with. That does hold this deck back a little bit. Though I do have to say at the same time, if she gets something along the line of Mikani in her deck, that would be great. So I'm willing to bump her up to like low B tier, but I'm not gonna make her any higher until she get a proper support for it. Okay, last stretch here, and we have Miscellaneous. Essentially either nationless or the deck that belong to a nation but doesn't really fit, like Gotobun for example. So let's start off with the main villain of Field Race, Grifogilla the Balls. Vatek improves upon the deck sustainability and also less requirement for the pressure, but I feel it is still a slow as fuck deck, and against the deck in a higher tier, the deck simply just cannot fight. And even in the A tier decks, I would say a lot of them has a good chance of beating Omina Crucio if the player don't know what to do. So I feel like B feels like a right place. Like in the hands of good player, it can be great if it was properly built, so have to give the credit where it's due. Then we have Gotobun, and oh boy, they kind of get power creep very quickly. So here is my final thought on each of them. I will try to put it as quick as possible. Ishika, low B tier. The decks still have a good easy condition of getting a guard restrict, but being 3 attack that doesn't hit very hard just hurt the deck. Nino, C tier, low C tier. I feel like her half air shadow stage skill are just start to biting her in the ass, because without those shadow stage skill, your deck won't get enough benefit, and against the deck in the high tier, they can just rush you the hell out within a single turn, and this is based on a real life experience. Then we have Miku, which I would have to say still in A tier, but I will put like low A, maybe like here. The thing about Miku is that Miku is super consistent out of the 5, in the sense that you can get a healthy amount of rush as early as turn 2, and you can get into a really disgusting shenanigan on turn 3 immediately. And on top of that, the deck is not as demanding in terms of the memory combo as the other 4 right lines. So essentially the deck is better because of the fact that it doesn't rely on a memory mechanic, which is not very good. Okay, Yotsuba, I'll put in high B. In a hand of good player, Yotsuba will disgustingly kill any deck that can be damage denied or resource control. That's how good Yotsuba is as Dolly. Meanwhile, still build up your condition for the 14 memory, which essentially is auto win. Essentially, all her deck playstyle is all about sustaining, and she sustained extremely well enough into the late game that most of the time, if you are unaware of how Yotsuba play, you more or less will lose to this deck. But I don't think she deserves an A tier, because it is very hard to play Yotsuba. And of course, the deck in the highest tier are just able to just pressure Yotsuba like no tomorrow. And last but not least, Izuki, low A tier. I'll leave her in like a bottom of A tier. The biggest problem I think with Izuki is the fact that you have to build your drop zone first, and her drop zone power can be interrupted within her own deck. But over overall, she is very similar to Musha King, albeit a little bit more specific in terms of what she demands for. And that is the end of the tier list of this video, and oh boy, it's a long one, so I will have to say this first. I might miss something in the video, and I will try to add in as much detail as I can of whatever I'm missing, but I do want to see your opinion in the comments down below as well. And once again, just help my channel a little bit. This video take way too long for me to actually record and edit everything, so it would be great if you guys help me out on this one. And yeah, that's all I have for today, and take care of yourself, and see you guys in the part 2 and then the Divine tier list, you know. じゃあね。